Hello everyone. Welcome to this session about coding agents in AL. Today we will see how we can use the APIs provided in Business Central to code our own agents. To get a quick start and jump right into it, you can get the latest version of the VS Code extension and use the new project command to access our templates. There you will find a new template called agent, where you will get both samples of the code that will be shown and an almost ready agent that you can publish and see directly in the UI. You will also get a very nice README that you can go through to figure out all the different parts of designing an agent and setting up different functionalities that are offered by Business Central. The first step to designing an agent is defining the agent type. The agent type, you can think of it as a blueprint for the agent that defines a lot of things like the default settings and the identity of your agent. It consists of the following parts. First of all, we have a new enum value that you have to add to the agent metadata provider enum via an extension. This will be the main identifier of your agent. Then you will need to also set up a new Copilot capability via another enum extension, which will act as a feature switch so that users can turn the feature on and off. And finally, you will need to provide implementations for the agent interfaces, which defines a lot of different things that we will see very soon. Here is an example of the metadata provider. You can see that it has a value, it has a name, and then it has an implementation for the different interfaces that need to be implemented for an agent to work. This is the starting point where you tie your implementation with your agent. Here you can also see an extension for the Copilot capability. You just need the unique name and the unique caption so that your users can figure out what corresponds to your specific feature. Jumping on to the interfaces themselves, they are what basically defines the default settings and the behavior of your agent. The first one is the agent factory interface, which defines the default settings. These include things like the first time setup page. This is what will come up when your users first try to create an agent. Then this is also the place where the Copilot capability is bound to your agent, and a few other settings like what is the default profile that your agents will be using and what are the default permissions. Then we have the metadata interface, which defines the runtime behavior of agents, some settings that can change during the lifetime of an agent. These are things like what summary page is shown. Here you can also override the message review page to show something different. You can change what initials will appear for your agent and a few other things. Finally, we have the task execution interface, which is the interface that controls things that happen when messages are processed, like, for example, validation for input and output messages that you can add through AL. And what suggestions are shown when the agent will ask your user for assistance, and the user can click on to proceed. And finally, settings that are context-specific, like what language should be used on a specific page, for example, based on the customer, formatting, and so on. Going into the message validation itself, some things that you can do with this API is that you can, for example, implement relevance checks before accepting an input message for further processing, so that you can discard, for example, unrelated messages. You can add warnings on input messages in case that you want to point your user's attention to them. And finally, you can also modify output messages to add signatures, for example, if you want to add an email signature. Here you can see an example of the implementation of this interface. On the first one, you can see that there is code to choose based on the type of the message and either post-process output messages or validate them. You can see that we can add suggestions in the user intervention suggestions. And finally, you can see that I can add an if based on the page ID and change the currency, for example, that our agent is supposed to use. Let's jump into another topic, which is very important when designing agents: agent types versus instances. So, okay, you have defined the type for your agent, but now it's time to actually make an agent that does something. So in Business Central, agents are modeled via instances, which are also users in Business Central. You have a type of an agent, but then you have multiple instances of this type, which need to be created. These instances keep their own versions of the permissions, of the profile, the user settings, and the instructions. You can also notice in the previous interfaces that we showed that there is an agent user ID as part of the method signatures, so you can define these interfaces to behave differently based on the instance that they are targeting. But where do I create an agent? So our stop to do that is the setup page. On top of the role sender, you will see icons that allow you to create agents if you so allow. If you click on them, you will get a setup page where you will be able to create new agents, and you will be the one defining the setup page for custom agents. When an agent is already created, the setup page will also be used for its configuration. What is the setup page? The setup page is a normal page in Business Central, except we have a new type, the configuration dialog, which is specifically designed for making agent setup pages. It has a few parts. The first part is the agent setup part, which is a standard component that gives you some basic information about the agent, like its name, a toggle to turn it on and off, and a few other things. Then you add your own functionality in case you want to add custom settings for your agent. Here you can see an example of the setup page. On the left, you can see the setup part, which is the standard component, and then on the right you can see things that were added extra. Notice here that the left part also contains things like disclaimers about AI usage, which are important to add when you are designing an AI feature. What do I need to design a setup page and to make it work? The first thing is that you will need to make your own table to track your own instances. It needs to be a table that has the user security ID as the primary key, which is also what is used for agents. And then it should also hold your custom settings for your agent. And then you can use the agent setup code unit to make instances of the agent and track them inside this table. The code for the page is also, it goes along those lines. One of the very important concepts in its design is that it's supposed to work with a temporary table. So that means that you should only save your changes when the user clicks OK and accepts. And on the right, you can see a little bit about how it works. You can also find these things in the template. The main part is that the setup part, the standard component, gives you access to a setup buffer record that you can use to track some of the basic characteristics of an agent, like its ID, if it's active, and so on. And you set this to make changes. And then you also make changes to your own table when the user clicks OK. The agent setup code unit allows you to basically automatically create an agent when you save changes on it. Finally, you also need to set instructions on it in order for the agent to have some instructions. Another alternative for creating agents is to create them programmatically. So you can also tie agent creation to, for example, clicking an action or some workflow. This needs to be in a user session, but otherwise it is possible to create agents dynamically, and you will do that through the agent code unit. Another thing that is offered is quite a lot of functions on the agent code unit that can be used to manage your agent. You can set its display name, its profile, and a bunch of other settings through the agent code unit. This is the main place to look at if you are making changes dynamically to the configuration of your agent. Instructions are also very important. They can be loaded at any time during the lifetime of the agent, but for most agents, the most common pattern is to load them during the creation of the agent, and you can get them from a resource so that you can have a nice place to store them and display them. Another feature that is supported is KPI pages for your agents. When a user hovers over your agent's avatar, they will be able to see important metrics about the agent. So here you can see an example. This is very similar to the setup page, except you can use any card part page, and you can add there metrics which are important for your agent. Now, okay, I've created my agent, I've created my instances, I need to assign work to it so that it's useful. You can do that through the tasks part of the API, which allows you to automate task creation for the agent instances. There is a set of code units that you can use. The most important ones are the agent task and the builder code units. They allow you to build both tasks and messages. Let's talk about tasks versus messages. For tasks, you can imagine them as units of work for the agent. They are bound to a specific agent instance. They have a title, and they are triggered when the agent should start processing. Messages are instead bound to a task. You add input messages to a task to give extra context to the agent except its instructions. For example, its instructions might be to process invoices, and the message might be which invoice to process. The agent then creates output messages to respond to your user. Multi-turn interactions are also supported because you can insert multiple input messages, and the agent might answer multiple times if it gets a new input message. Okay, so how do I create my first task? The task basically requires you to get your agent instance, possibly from your setup table, and then use the task builder code unit in order to create the task. You create a message for your task, and you populate the task builder, you call create, and then you get the task for your agent that is waiting for approval from the user and will execute when they do that. Another thing that is supported is the ability to add attachments to your messages. Attachments can be, for example, PDF documents that will be analyzed by the agent, and the text will be extracted. You do that very similarly through the message builder code unit. So from the task builder, before you create it, you can get the message builder and insert different attachments into it through the provided method add attachment. And then when you create the task, these attachments will be included. Another thing that is supported is, as mentioned, is multi-turn agents, where you can continue a discussion with an agent. So when it finishes and sends an output message, for example, you can send a new input message to continue the discussion. This can be to simulate an email thread or some other continuous discussion. There is the external ID field on messages and the corresponding method, which allows you to tie messages to concepts like an email thread so that you can find them and continue them. So how do I trigger tasks after I have created the code for it? All you need to do is to embed it inside the Business Central, either as part of an action or as part of a process through events, or in many different ways that you can try through coding in AL. Here we have an example where we are doing this as part of a page extension, and we are adding a new action to the sales order list. Again, like with agents, you can also manage tasks through the agent task code unit, which allows you to, for example, stop tasks or restart them, and a few other things. There are a few different ways to get the result of a task. One of them is to wait for the task via polling. And you can do that through the agent task record. Through the record, you have the status field, which you can use to see in what kind of state the task is in, if it is, for example, completed or stopped by the system because something occurred. And then you can continue and query into Business Central to get its result. This is good for unit testing or these kinds of non-production ready scenarios. The other thing you can do is you can create events that will only fire if the session is an agent session. This way you can have code be triggered after the agent, for example, does an action in the UI. The agent session code unit provides you the isAgent session procedure, which lets you do exactly this. You can also use the user ID if you want to add events only for specific instances. The final topic that we will talk about today is about exposing your agent to other apps. By default, the AL API only supports interacting with agents defined in your own app. This is for security reasons, so that different agents don't interfere with each other. But it is possible to also expose your agents to other apps by creating an API for your app. So what you need to do is that you need inside your app to create public functions that other apps can call. Like, for example, you can see the deactivate function, which by default would be blocked. But because we are exposing it as a public method on our code unit, myAgent public API, it can be called by other apps. So this way, you can expose everything inside your app to be used by external consumers. You can find everything that was discussed today in our documentation about coding agents in AL. Thank you very much for your time, and have fun coding agents in AL.